But listening to Nicole, who I love, doesn't she just, everything she says, it's just poetic. We hope that we can do justice like she does. But what's enough? Is there enough? And for us, I was thinking, wow, for us it was too much. It wasn't a problem of is there enough, it was there is too much. All of our life previously to giving everything away, we had spent 20 years seeking fame and success and accolade after accolade, and none of it satisfied. It's something you specifically noticed.
Yeah, I mean, how many of you guys have had big dreams and goals and you've chased after them in your life? Hands. And how many of you have got those big dreams and goals and looked at it and gone, well, that wasn't what I expected? Anyone had that? Yeah, I mean, all my life I'd had these goals to be this big success and create, an empire in Australia and that would expand overseas and or go to all the best parties and hang out with all the coolest celebrities and be big and famous, And this is before it was cool to be famous. And then you get these things one after another. The dominoes would fall over and you'd be sitting there going, oh, well, that wasn't it. That wasn't it. Well, that wasn't fulfilling at all. And yeah, it was fun for a while, but just as you were saying earlier, that while is quite short. And then it's the next thing. Well, what's the next hole in my heart that I've got to fill? And then it becomes self-destructive. I always say it's for people who haven't gone down, or the people who are less successful. I always think that it must be a happier place to be, because at least you look at the successful and think, well, if I was just that, life would be good. Whereas once you've gone and done that, and you've had all the things that people think make you happy, and you realize they don't, and I think this is why so many big celebs, end up in rehab and end up on drugs and end up killing themselves, because they know that isn't the answer. So when you don't have the answer, when what the world told you was the answer to your happiness isn't the answer to your happiness, what do? And that's where the adventure came in.
So as you saw in the video, we had climbed all these heights, and Geoff particularly was very excited about collecting all the different accolades and making me famous. He did that for me. And along the way, no matter what we achieved, it got less and less fulfilling, to the point where for him specifically, I could just see the spiral that he was falling down and how much he was in pain. So when he finally came up with that crazy idea, I honestly said no straight up. I said, you've got to be kidding me. No, I'm not giving away everything we own. Take a Panadol, go back to bed. But I woke up the next morning and I realized, you know what? He's right. What we've got here is absolutely pointless. I see it time and time again. And what's going to happen? Who knows what's going to happen next if we do this? So then began probably a 3-month process of trying to give away everything we own, which sounds super easy, but actually it created so many troubles.
Yeah, I was a hardcore atheist, stroke agnostic on certain days. And so I had no interest in anything spiritual, not even, Buddhism and all of that sort of stuff. But once we found out that the things that were supposed to make us happy didn't, I thought, well, I need to start exploring. So the last place I was ever going to explore was Christianity. So we threw ourselves into all of these others. But I don't know about any of you. It's easy to read books about faith or about a religion or about meditation or spirituality. There's thousands of them on the bestseller list. And if you're into the New Age, which I sort of moved towards, there's millions of them. And you listen to the webinars and you go to the seminar, because I throw myself into things, if you're going to do it properly. So I started to get into I wanted to hear what everybody had to say and then make a decision. And so that's why we started to throw ourselves into all the spiritual stuff. It wasn't that I believed in any of it. In fact, it was the opposite. Quite often I was doing it to try and prove it was wrong. Then I realized one day that I was getting the more I realized that these religions, I'd meditate for 10, 15 hours. I'd go to long meditation courses where I don't know if any meditators in the room, people who back in the day? Yeah, I used to do dozens of hours with mantras and without mantras, and literally sitting on your head, and all sorts of weird stuff. Anyway, it got to the point where I was getting it had helped a bit because these things do help. They're like, I call them Band-Aid. You have Band-Aids, right? Not plasters? Okay. Okay. It was like a Band-Aid over a gaping hole in the heart. At least it sort of covered it slightly. And so I thought, well, the only thing, I'm fed up with trying to read about whether this is true, whether God's really real. I'm fed up with other people telling me their stories because most of them didn't really have much stories to tell. You know what I mean? I wasn't interested in Christians at the time. I was interested in the others, and they just tell me all the same, namaste, whatever. And so I said, I'm just going to find out. And I thought the only way I can find out is to throw myself at the mercy. And I'd heard the saying, I'd heard the phrase, have you heard this? The universe will provide. Right. Well, that was, everyone used to say, oh, don't worry, the universe will provide. I'd be like, oh, give me a break. And I always thought faith was for idiots. Because in my mind, it was for people who couldn't be bothered to do the research. Okay? And there's so many people are like that, where they just go, oh, I believe in this. And they don't know why they believe in it. They've never studied it. And so I used to make it my party trick to crucify Christians verbally, because I had read the Bible like 5 times, and I knew the texts, and I was able to literally blow up their ideals right in front of all the other people. And it became this sort of perverse hobby of mine at parties. Very unhelpful. And then it got to the point where it's thought, I'm not learning anything from these people, so we need to do something super extreme. So I said to Bessie, hey, what about we give everything we own away? First she said no, and then she said, why don't we sell it? And I said, well, there's no challenge in that, is there? If you walk away with a bunch of money, ooh, look how spiritual I've become. It's like you've got to have nothing, or there's no lesson in it. So we did. And we put that clip on YouTube, and we actually ended up with 64,000 people contacting us for our stuff. And as Bessie said, have you ever tried to give a whole house of stuff away? It's really not that easy. At first, the locusts come around like crazy, and you're like, yeah, this is brilliant. Yeah, I'm going to get rid of it. And then there's a bunch of stuff they don't want. And you're like, what am I going to do with all this? So it took us, and we were trying to look for the people who needed it most. So it wasn't just a carte blanche, yeah, take it. It was like, okay, so tell us your story and why we should give you our car. Tell us your story and why we should give you our jewelry. Or, Bessie had so many of the most expensive shoes because she was in the industry, and,
A tax deduction.
Tax deduction.
That's what I always said. But what was interesting, talking about the word gratitude, is just seeing how human nature would turn. So at first, people were like, wow, you're giving everything away. And they'd write us an email, and it was like, wow, you guys are amazing, so inspiring. And I would just be so grateful if you would give me your Mercedes. And then because we did give away a Mercedes, but then when we had to choose one person to give that car to, and some 20,000 people that weren't going to get it, the change was just staggering. Suddenly we started getting hate email from the same people, bleeping, bleep, 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 how dare you not give me your car? And it was just, it was really shocking, but it was good because it broke that bubble for us of thinking that it was all about giving everything away. And it began something very big in us, which I loved hearing you talk about today, which is scarcity and enough. Living in a world of excess and then going to having nothing was actually highly addictive. We, as Geoff said, we gave everything away finally, and we just started driving. And we would, as we went, we wouldn't work, but we would stop and we would help people whatever they needed. And we would work for them, but we would never accept any money from it. And we'd just do it. Like all of a sudden we're happy cleaning other people's toilets. And something crazy happened in our minds. We realized that it was actually the opposite of the struggle for more. It was doing the mundane, helping someone, a little old lady, put her washing up on the line because she couldn't reach up, was suddenly the most satisfying and rewarding moment. And we developed a deep gratitude, not just for people, but for experiences. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, when we separated the construct of an hour's work for an X amount of dollars, the exchange of goods that is the marketplace today, and we all think that the exchange of goods is something that just must happen. If I'm going to do this for you, then I need you to do this for me. And I said, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to do this differently. We're going to do something because something needs to be done. and someone needs it done. And we're going to ask nothing, and most importantly, we're going to expect nothing, because what we get out of it is actually meeting a need that was there to be met. And so we started doing things just for love. And I mean, come on, look at the lifestyle. I mean, that was not me. You know, I was as mercenary as the next person trying to climb the ladder of success. So for us to do this was quite a big leap of faith. And the most amazing thing happened. I would do the most menial tasks you can ever imagine. We were on one person had a large property and had all these animals, and the animals would foul up everything. I mean, they had all these huge dogs, and there was dog poo everywhere. And it was my job every day to go around, and he had 10 goats and 3 horses, and it was my job every day to go around and pick up the crud. And do you know what? It's one of the most satisfying jobs I've ever had in my life. Now, I tell you something, you couldn't have paid me to do it. There's no amount of money that I would have actually said, yeah, I'll do that for you. But because I was doing it for love, because this old guy needed it done and I was making his life a little bit better, I had this feeling that I'd never had ever before in the marketplace. And it really opened my eyes to a whole new world out there.
But I have to admit, I saw it differently. Geoff started doing all this extra work, so that he was, helping with the animals, but then he'd work longer and do things that they didn't ask. And I took him aside one day and I said, Geoff, just stop, just calm down. Let's just do the things they've asked us to do, and we don't need to kill ourselves. And he turned around, and I'll never forget it. He said, Bessie, I'm not doing this for them. I'm doing this for me. If we're not doing this for the feeling that we're getting out of helping, then what's the point? I was like, oh. You're so right. Right. And so I started to love picking up poop as well. But what I started to notice personally as we were travelling and staying with these people, we would do one main thing, which was to take on their beliefs and their values while we're there. So if they wanted to put the water out on the full moon and have the crystals and the thing, that's what we would do. If we had to wear our hair in turbans so the evil spirits didn't get on them, or a whole bunch of other really interesting ways of living, and do it with our whole heart. And one of those families were born again Christians. And so we got to that point, we're like, oh man, this is we don't want to do this. We don't want to go and pray, but that's our thing. So we've got to go and do it. And it was one of the first things that started to chip away at our resistance to Christianity.
Yeah, so after living with the hippies and the Buddhists and the Hare Krishnas and the witches and the pagans and the cavemen and the dogman and all the other various characters that we ran into and by the way, everything was always by fluke. We called it by living by flow. That was what we called it. And we would just flow into a town and just start talking to people, and before you know it, someone would say, oh, I've got something that needs to be done, and so we'd go and do it, and then they'd say, oh, I've got a mate down the road who's lives in a cave, and why don't you go down and see him? So my job was to document and find out the meaning of life. I had a big long list of questions, what are we here for? What do you believe? How do you know it's true? What's making you, mostly important, what's making you happy? What's fulfilling you? And so I would hit people with these questions and all the different types of religions you can imagine, and then we would immerse ourselves in that religion for the time we were there. So we got through quite a few things, and we noticed that it wasn't really it was a fun adventure, and when you're distracted, you don't feel so depressed, you don't feel like you're so empty because you're distracted. That's why people go to work too much, isn't it? Anybody? And or it's why you go to the gym too much, or whatever it is you do. And so I was noticing in between on those long drives, because sometimes we're just going to drive for 2 days and see where we end up. And those long cross America or cross Africa drives or wherever we were, and you just get to think, and you're like, you know what? I'm still me. I'm really not any more changed than I was before I left. I'm still got a hole in my heart. And I started to believe that maybe I hadn't given enough away. And I was beginning to think, I've still got all these comforts. I'm still eating, when we go to someone's house and they cook us a nice curry because we helped them with a business or whatever we did. Maybe if I sort of fasted all the time, maybe if I meditated much, much longer, maybe if I went off into the hills without my daughter and my wife and literally lived in a cave, maybe that would be the answer. I'd get closer to God if God was there. And so that was on my mind. And then,
Sure. One day he's just been telling me that he thinks he hasn't given up enough and we need to give up more, and I'm just, my jaw was on the ground. I couldn't believe it. We'd already given up so much, and how could this not be enough for him? And we parked right by San Francisco Bay, looking out over the water, and in the morning Geoff gets out of the van and he's looking around, checking, you know, if we're still discreet enough, and he starts chatting to some guy, and I hear him chatting outside for a long time, and then I hear them burst into laughter. He comes in and he tells me that the guy he's just met was a renunciate, which means someone who has renounced or given up everything, every pleasure, every human need and want. He was living in a cave in the mountains, what Geoff had just said he wanted to do, surviving on only if the locals in Thailand brought him water or a little bit of rice. He had nothing to lay on, no clothes, nothing. For how long? A long time.
Yeah, he did it for years.
For years and years.
Yeah, he did it for years, and he got to the point where, the whole point was to renounce your emotions, renounce your coldness, renounce your desires. In other words, if any of you guys, some of the Buddhist teachings, they say that your desires are fleeting, and they can distract you from the truth of knowing who you are. So he had gone out of his way to remove all his desires. So whether it was hunger, whether it was thirst, whether it was tired, whether it was friendship, whether it was sex, whether it was any of the emotions that we usually have, his job was to remove all of them. And he said he'd got to this place where he had done that. He said he was desireless, and he felt he was like almost one with God. And then he said, but something happened. He goes, I realized in that moment that there was one thing I couldn't give up, and that was pride at how I'd given up everything. And he said, that moment, I got out of the cave, I went down to the local village, I borrowed some money, bought a packet of cigarettes, a tub of ice cream, and a bottle of whiskey, and he said, and I never went back. And I was like, oh, wow, that's such good timing.
Thank goodness, right? Because or else we wouldn't be here. We'd be naked and afraid somewhere in the middle of the jungle. But all of this is getting somewhere, because along the way, God was pursuing us. And he pursued us through everything. He really did. Through everything that seems like it's not even of God, he was still, nudging us ever so slightly, like you do, like a tugboat does with a big, beautiful big boat. And there was one point when Geoff realised, that's it. We've lived with all these different religions. There's no answers here. I'm going to have to do a 40-day, 40-night fast.
Do you want to do the little miracles first?
Sure. Before that, before he did that, along the way, as I said, God pursuing us and leaving us little hints, we started to come across constant mini miracles. We were living with nothing, as you know, and we weren't working. We were earning a very, very small income, riding occasionally. And so we had really not very much money, which you don't really need a lot when you're living in a van, right? All you need is gas and a little bit of food. We got really good at living on like $1 a day or something. Couple of dollars with our daughter as well. But one day, one of the mini miracles, we're driving along, we're running out of gas, and we're also starving, and we've got to get a certain amount of distance. And I turned to Geoff and I was like, do we spend $40 on food and don't go anywhere, $30 on food and $10 on gas, or all these different, and it's like we can't do it. I don't know what we're going to do. So we decided to go up and put $20 gas, walk up to the inside to the gas station. I don't know why you're paying inside there. And I said, can I have $30 on pump, whichever? She said, oh, but you've already got $30 on there, ma'am. I said, what? Yeah, there's already a credit on that machine.
For $30?
For $30. One of the many, many examples, and we just drove away as fast as we could.
and our daughter, she was like 1, 2. And she would come running up to us after we'd let her play on a playground, and she'd be just like with the big grin, and she'd be holding on to something. Oh, what have you got? And I'd take it out of her hand. It'd be a $50 note. And she would just find them all over the place. And so all of these miracles, even though we weren't Christians at the time, all of these things were falling into place that kept us tantalized. Like, what is this thing? Why can't we know more about it? Why haven't we found out more? But it's clearly doing something around. It's clearly working its path around us. And so I was getting quite frustrated again, because this had been now going on for several years. How many years?
8 years.
No, that wasn't 8. Not when we went
7,
to. No,
6,
when I started my fast.
A long time. 6 years.
Yeah, about 6 years. We've been doing this for about 6 years, 33 countries. And you might wonder, how do you go somewhere? How do you travel overseas with no money? Miracles. Honestly, unbelievable things. People just suddenly calling up and saying, "Hey, would you come over here and do something? Help at a seminar for us out of the blue?" Okay, yeah, if you pay our ticket, and then then we spend the next 5-6 months in Africa, and again living on the road, again with no money, again just seeing what unfolded, and just allowing, as we said, allowing the universe to unfold. And it was really exhilarating. But it got to the point where I was getting very frustrated. How are we going for time? I don't want to go over. Okay. I was getting really fed up with the lack of spiritual growth. We had gone so far and we had seen all these miracles, but the hole was still there. I was still clearly... anyone else feel... you don't put your hand up, you don't. But anyone else feel that hole? Anyone else chased the answer to that hole and tried to fill it with... Well, in my case, back in the day, what happens when you get successful is you go with the sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And so I'd done more than my fair share of that kind of hole filling, and that hadn't succeeded. So once I'd gone round all the spiritual traps, and I'd sat for hours under the guru's instruction, and I'd done ridiculously long, intensive seminars and courses and crazy stuff, and waved sage and said spells, and and put crystals in places crystals shouldn't go, and various things, and none of it had really hit the spot. So I was getting angry with the powers that be, shall we call it, because at the time I was still basically an atheist stroke agnostic. And so I decided, right, what's the number one spiritual person I can think of? Well, probably Jesus, right. And what was the thing that he did that was the toughest that got God's attention? 40 days and 40 nights. Right, that's what I'm going to do. So I locked myself in a tiny room, and I was going to go out and do it in the mountains, but I got so desperately sick that I was kind of a bit worried that I was going to die. So I just locked myself in this room, with no music, no books, no media, no TV, no talking, no nothing. And I just drank water for the first 20 days. But the only thing I would do is I would meditate. I'd get up at 6 or 7, and I'd meditate for an hour, then I'd pray for an hour. Then I'd meditate for an hour, then I'd pray for an hour. Then I'd meditate for an hour, then I'd pray for an hour. I'd meditate for an hour, I'd pray for an hour. I'd do that all day till 8 o'clock at night, go to bed, get up, do it all again. So I'd done this for 8 days. Now, if you've ever done 8 days of not eating, that's pretty hard. Who's done 8 days of not eating?
7 days and 9 hours.
There we go, 7 days and 9 hours. And now add to that like 14 hours of meditation a day, meditation, prayer, and no stimulus of any kind other than that. And you start to go a little bit like, all the anger comes in. And so I started to get really mad with God. And I started yelling and screaming at God and saying, I've given up my whole blimmin' life looking for you, and this is the best you can do. This is a load of rubbish. I'm so angry. And in that moment, I had, I'm not going to go into all the details because that's a whole nother story, but I had the most intense, I met God. I didn't see God, but I met God. I felt his love in such an intense way, unlike anything I've ever had before, and I just started bawling my eyes out, like so much that I felt like my stomach was going to come out my mouth. Anyone experienced that when they met God? Yeah. And And then a bunch of things happened that were like quite incredible and prophetic. And after that, I said to Bessie, who used to come in and bring me just hot water, I'd pretend it was a cup of tea, and I said, bring me a Bible and a Tao Te Ching. Anyone read the Tao Te Ching? Okay, it's the Taoist Bible, and I used to absolutely love it. It's one of the most profound books you could ever read. So for me, the Bible was like, bring me the Bible. Oh, because I realized that this experience had something to do with the Christian God. And even though when I had it and I was in the middle of it and I was like, oh God, please, does this mean I'm going to be a Christian? And I felt like almost like a cosmic laugh, like, ho, 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 ho. And as if to say, well, it's bigger than that, but so don't worry.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
What was causing all the resistance towards Christianity?
Well, the backstory is that I was brought up in a Christian family that used to drag me to church that would be 3 hours long and bore me to tears. And then I got into science, and no one around me who was a Christian knew anything, could possibly debate a single scientific fact about Christianity. So to me, it was just an absolute load of rubbish. And I'd spent a good deal of my life researching Christianity in order to destroy Christians, like the ones who I grew up with. It was just bitterness towards what I saw as fakery, hypocrisy, mass hypocrisy. So that's the backstory. So I started reading the Bible and the Tao Te Ching, and a miracle happened. I started loving the Bible. It felt rich and it felt full, and stories that I'd read 1,000 times when I was at Sunday school were just, they suddenly had depth and meaning. And the Tao Te Ching, which to me had felt so full before, seemed shallow and empty and hollow and almost like, someone crying out in a big auditorium and sound just bouncing around and nothing really hearing it. And it was really, I was shocked. And anyway, so by the end of all of that, we were starting to get a hint that maybe we should look into something that the Christians might do, maybe.
I'm going to add 2 little quick things to the end of that story, is that when he finally came out of that room, he just had this otherworldliness in his eyes, and he would just stare at butterflies. And the gratitude was just overwhelming. And there was one moment where he said to me, that time on day 12 when you brought me that hot water with a wave of lemon, and I suddenly remembered he had asked for hot water and asked me to wave a lemon over as if it would just be almost not lemony. And I had totally forgotten to wave the lemon over the water. But he was so grateful because he thought I'd done it and he'd worked it up in his mind, and to him it was just the most beautiful cup of hot water that I realized, oh my gosh, that to him was that moment, right, of just thinking, this is it. But one of the other things was when he told me, do you mind sharing a tiny bit of the vision that you saw of the hole?
Oh, okay. Okay, so I don't know what you guys see your voids, or the voids you had as, but I saw mine very strongly as this giant cracked rock, like a deep crevasse with all these millions of fissures and cracks, like so tiny. And I realized that you can't psychology yourself better, because half the things there you don't even know are there. Half the cracks you don't know how they got there, you don't even see them. So how can you possibly fix them? And as I was in this massively deep prayer trance thing that God was doing with me, I saw from the very, very, very bottom of this bottomless crevasse the rocks coming together like this, and not just meeting with a gap in between, but literally melting back into themselves, all the cracks all the way up, and then at the very, very top it just closed over, and there was not a single crack in what it felt in my soul anymore. And for the first time in 40 years I felt whole. And it was so shocking to me that I thought, wow, I think I've just experienced a miracle, because I spent so many years trying to fill that hole, or cover it up at least so it didn't hurt. And I'd done everything I could possibly think of, and in 5 seconds God had healed it. And so I thought, well, this is obviously not going to last. Tomorrow it'll be gone. No, tomorrow it's still there. Next day, still there. Next day, still there. So about 12 days in, I'm like, maybe that really happened.
So we're getting to the end now of when Jesus really took over, because Geoff had his miracle, but I hadn't had mine. And to be honest, I was a tough nut. I was just dogged in my self-reliance. I was so proud that I didn't need anybody. I loved my husband, but I could survive on anything, hardly any money, a tiny amount of clothes, and it became my idol. It's like, I can look after myself. I don't need anybody, and I certainly don't need Christians, and I don't need whatever you've just gone through, even though that's wonderful that you're feeling better. So there was this one moment, I love that this class is called The Soul and Money, because it was that got me, and I cannot believe that was a thing. But we finally decided after that experience, there's something in this, what he's just experienced. It may not be so wise to go and live with people and take on their beliefs. And so we decided, you know what, we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to decide to be in a house and not absorb someone else's beliefs and explore this a little bit more, which is that time when you saw in the video when Geoff started to walk up the hill and he literally heard God say to him, you call yourself a seeker? You will go and do any crazy thing, but you won't walk in Mariners Church? God said Mariners Church. And check what is going on with them, what they're all about. And he was really challenged, started coming. I would not come. I was brought up as a preacher's kid, similar example to him, and experienced the absolute opposite of everything that is grace. And so I was never going to come back into a church. But God got me on money, because we had everything, then we'd given everything away, then I was proud of having nothing and needing nothing. But when we started living like regular people with regular bills, that became important a little bit, right? And one of our clients that we'd had for a long time just suddenly stopped paying. They were a startup, and it wasn't like they were never going to pay, but it was next week. And 3 months later, we still hadn't been paid. And we'd racked up all this credit card debt. And we come to church. We're at this point coming to Mariners. We're good with the God thing, but not with the Jesus thing. And guess what they're talking about? Money. Kenton is talking about Financial Peace University, and I was so annoyed. It's like, I came to church to be distracted by what's going on in my life. I don't want to hear you talking about money and debt and all these things that are bothering me. But that's where God had to get me for me to pay attention. I looked around the room and I saw this is 5,000 people who are not trying to do it all by themselves. They actually choose to take the things that are burdens and not try and carry them, but to give them over to someone else. So I just literally burst into tears at the FPU sermon, and I came out and I said to Geoff, I don't care what I used to believe, or even, I don't even know if this Jesus thing is real, but I'm just going to let go and I'm going to leap and see what happens. And we know what happens when we just completely surrender our heart to Jesus. And he completely took over in the most beautiful way. He's made our life so much better and so much fuller. I can't even believe that I existed without him. He's completely rescued and restored me. Amen. Amen. We threw ourselves into Mariners, and luckily they came with welcoming open arms and have accepted us for everything we've ever done, and there's been lots. And not only accepted us, but let us be part of it.
Amen to that.
Amen to that. But I will just say, I just love how God brings those two things together. I never thought soul and money could ever go together. We destroyed our soul for money, then we gave it away and had our soul, we thought, but God just brings it all back together and says, I created this, I can complete this for you, and if you focus on me, it will get sorted out. And I just love that. So thank you so much for having us.
From having nothing, and then
That was another miracle.
Yeah, well, that was another miracle. So my sons have moved over. My sons to my first marriage had moved over here. And one of them said to me one day, Dad, okay, enough gallivanting around looking for the meaning of life. I want you here. And so I said, well, we go with the flow. Wherever the universe provides, we will be. So we'll see. And literally within 7 days, we had somebody call us up saying, I'm starting a business in America. Would you help me roll it out? Which paid, and then the very first place we walked into, we rented, and the amount that they were paying us was exactly the amount they needed to pay the rent. So there's no security in any of that, but we'd gone way past worrying about living with security because it doesn't make anybody happy anyway. And it just kept flowing. It just kept week after week. It just worked and it just grew. Until you have to look at your closets and you go, I've got stuff again. I've got to get rid of this stuff again.
Sorry, just one little thing I forgot to say is that when I fell in love with Jesus and I gave it all over to him, what I think is really important to know is that he didn't come in and repair everything in our life financially. We didn't wake up the next morning and our bank account was filled again. But what I did do was just focus on Jesus. Right, that's all I could do. My heart, I was like, I've been rescued. This is all that matters. And just focusing on him and serving everywhere I could. They let me join the prayer team. Crazy. And eventually serve in women's ministry, core team and prayer ministry. And I was seeking God hard and fast. I was just running in a beautiful way. And I only just realised, it was like a year ago that I looked back and I realised, oh my gosh, he repaired it all. And I don't know how. All that debt, I mean, we didn't make any huge amounts of money, and it's not that it will always be that way, but I learned to just let it go because God's the one who gives us everything and he can give it in many, many different ways. And I just wanted to mention that it's not necessarily an immediate, but it's just focusing on what is so much more important. I've seen that time and time again.
Yeah, and God's got plans for us that often we miss because we're too busy doing our plans. That's one of the things that I really discovered is when you can hold space with God. We have business meetings every Monday with God, so we just sit and pray. Okay, God, you know that we don't have enough for this, so either you help us work it out or we don't have it. That's fine. I don't mind either way. And it's just about letting go of all of your preconceived ideas about how your life should be and what expectations you've got to live up to and what kind of car you should drive. And you know what? God is, since we've taken that way of living, God's blessed us far more than I was ever able to bless us when I was working hard. And we're happy. And that is more than any gift I could ever imagine.
True. So true.
You find yourself still struggling with the idea of minimalism versus content? Like, after you've gone through that journey and now you're back to...
Do you mean, do we keep wanting to be minimalist? There is an element of that. But okay, here's the interesting thing. So when we gave it all away, you get to the place where you're really comfortable with having nothing, and then having stuff seems decadent and unnecessary, and pointless, repulsive even, yeah. So it was a slow process to bring things back into our lives. And then we wake up one day, and I remember I looked in the closet and there was stuff. And I thought, oh, stuff. You know what I mean? Here, it's back, yeah. And so we did another, right, everybody, we've got stuff, come and get it.
But before we built up the stuff, the first time we moved into a house, it was so fun. We moved in, we signed the lease, we brought the mattress in from the van and our 3 bags and put them in the corner, and we're like, look at all this space, what are we going to do now? And Geoff was so determined. He said, we've given everything away several times over now. Every time we got even too much in the van, we'd give it away. He said, I'm not doing that again. This is before God, before we believed in God. He said, we're just going to see what the universe provides. And surely enough, we waited 3 or 4 weeks, sitting on the carpet, leaning against the bare wall, and eventually the people that we'd helped started to say, oh, take this toaster, and here's some cutlery, and now, truly, our whole house is courtesy of people that were giving away, like we gave away, and it's beautiful. Oh my gosh, God's got good taste.
What was I going to say to that? I've forgotten. Sorry, any other questions?
I like having stuff now.
Oh, yeah.
That is another thing, right? Because I realised that after a while it was like excess and then running away and seeking, and then now there's a beauty. God has a beauty in it as well. I'm not saying we don't buy hardly anything, but that there's a beauty in being in one place. There's a beauty in serving people without travelling around. And we do a lot of serving here through Mariners. And it's like, wow, God can move everywhere. And this is just a different mode. And I'm really, really enjoying it.
Yeah, and it was never about giving everything away. Ultimately, that's not what anybody has to do to find the meaning of life. That was just a stupid idea that I had at the time. And so there is just as much, there is no great spiritual truth in having nothing. And that's what I discovered as well. That's what the renunciate discovered. He had nothing, and he said, this isn't the spiritual truth. What the spiritual truth is having Jesus in what you have and not letting it run you.
As Paul said, the Apostle Paul, that I've learnt the secret to being content in all and every circumstance, and that's what I grab hold of every day. And as we go through everything, as we go through challenges or health crises or money crises, it's just like, yeah, you know what? Where's Jesus in this? And where's my comfort and my stability and my rock in this? Because it's in this, and we've seen people cope with much harder situations. I think that's the thing. When you go to Africa and you see how people live, it's like, wow, we have all got it so easy, even in a van.
How old's your daughter now, and what does she say about her experience?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that. That was what I was going to say. Thank you for reminding me. She's now 10, and she had the time of her life on the road. She became one of the most social... First of all, we got so much grief from people saying, this is child abuse, you can't take a child around doing all this, they won't have any friends, they'll be socially inept, they'll be, backwards and all the rest of it. Well, tell that to Bluebell, because her name's Bluebell, because she is quite the little genius, and because she's had such a world view at 10. I mean, 33 countries at 10, playing with all sorts of demographics of children and adults, being able to mix it up with adults. She started her own business when she was in Africa, selling these bracelets to raise money for the people who were there, because the little girl she was playing with was 10 as well. The little girl was 10, she was 8, and this little girl was shorter than her and skinnier than her. And she was like, Daddy, why is she short and skinny? And I said, because she doesn't get enough to eat, sweetheart. And they couldn't get fish anymore in the village, or meat, for whatever reason. Anyway, long story short, she says, well, I'm going to fix it. And she did. She sold thousands and thousands of dollars worth of bracelets made by these people, and that raised money for this village. So, yeah. And when it came to things like miracles for her, it was funny because we started off, when she started, with just one little cuddly toy called Bunny. And her car seat was in the front seat. And by the time we'd gone around for the first year, the whole of the front seat was full of cuddly toys. Because everywhere we'd go, we'd sit in service stations for half a day, gas stations for half a day, because, it would be freezing outside and we'd want to just sit somewhere warm and have a cup of coffee. And we'd end up talking to people, and before you know it, their little kids were like, can I give her this toy? So she had this massive collection of toys. So then she saw the beauty of giving and receiving, and it was it was quite a lesson for her.
However, when we moved into our first house, she was so excited. She actually got the walk-in closet, because it was only a small place. The walk-in closet was her bedroom, but she'd never had a bedroom before. She'd always had a car seat, and that was her room. And so she was so excited, she'd go around telling everybody, guess what? I've got a toilet. And I was like, oh my gosh, let's just keep this beauty in her. But now she is 10. She's a worship leader here at Mariners. She was actually on in Big Church for Palm Sunday.
She was on stage.
Yeah, she was leading worship in Big Church last Palm Sunday with the pink dress, and oh my gosh, my heart. She was a Christian before we were, and actually at 5 years old, before we were even open to God, I started filming her. She was talking, pretending she was Captain Hook, and it turned into a sermon. And we had never talked about God. We'd kept her away from Christians, and there she was talking about prayer and light in your heart, and that God wants you to hear Him. It's on YouTube, and anyway, she started to break us along the way, but she is just precious. We love her.
Thank you so much. Is there anything you can share with us so where people can check things out online or see what you're doing next?
Bessie's doing, you can talk about that.
I'm leading a prayer and peace bath immersion here at Mariners once a month. It's called Soul Spa, and I have a website called Soul Spa Women. I'm sorry guys, it's just for the women now. But that's just a beautiful way to, non-believers, all believers come in and just feel God's presence, hear Him, and pray for others, and it's beautiful.
Yeah, and if you want to see some of the adventures, then the Life Change Experiment, you'll see videos and so forth.
We weren't Christians then, so don't judge
Yeah,
us.
so don't judge us.
There's no judgment. We already established that.
You guys,